Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the MotoGP-Xtra Podcast. This week we'll be covering the Australian Grand Prix. I'm Reese and joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is Dill. So then, always nice to see a race at Phillip Island, isn't it? First since 2019, we'll head straight into the weekend with Moto3. So there was actually rain before the race, so it kind of rained quite heavily in the morning, so I think the MotoGP warm-up was definitely wet. I'm not sure about Moto2 and Moto3, but there was also a little bit of rain right before the race. There was a slight start delay whilst they're waiting for the track to dry up a little bit, but then it was virtually a dry race, to be fair. A few damp spots when the race started, but initially we did start with a fairly big group of 8, which then did obviously break up into a group of 4. But what did you think to the actual racing in Moto3 this weekend? Seemed fairly clean and a little bit more Moto3-esque than we had seen the last few weekends.
Yeah, we had a nice big group, initially around 8 or so riders, and there was kind of gaps appearing lower down, but up towards the front, it was more traditional Moto3 where slipstream was very important out of the final corner. Obviously, being such a high-speed track, the slipstream actually takes a part of a lot of the corners as well, which you actually don't realise. Through stoners, you actually can pick up a bit of slipstream out of the final corner. You pick up slipstream before you even get the bike upright. Something people don't actually realise, that you can pick it up in the corners too. So that really, really brought the group together. And it was great to see bikes back on the Australian Phillip Island track. It's such a great track. We had some issues with wildlife at some points during the weekend, but other than that, this was pretty plain sailing. But it was a pretty good race. It was the usual crew. We had Foggia kind of lower down. Again, he always seems to struggle if there's kind of a bit of a common denominator. When there's something slightly off, he always seems to fall back. And with just a couple of wet patches. Now, it was pretty sunny at the start of the Moto3 race. There was a dry line, but just off the line, there was a couple of damp patches. Now, they weren't really bad, but they were probably mental patches where riders would be aware of, and it kind of just probably played into some riders' favour and probably played against other riders' favours. But pretty good to see bikes back there. I was really, really enjoying it, watching it. 1:30 in the morning, I think I watched that one at. Just about staying awake for it.
Yeah, that's the only problem with Australia, isn't it? It's the time zones, but I just watched it a bit later. I recorded it and then watched it later, so not a true fan quite there. But you did touch quickly on Foggia, struggling quite a bit. A strange weekend for Foggia because he was pretty fast on Friday. It wasn't too bad on Saturday morning, I don't think, but in qualifying, he didn't really put it together, and it's kind of nowhere. And again, it's just one of those weekends for Foggia. Neil Hodgson said it on the commentary for BT that this is why he's not going to win the championship. Well, I think he'd actually said this is why he'll never be a world champion, which was quite harsh, but you can't really argue with it. It's just Foggia turns up some weekends and doesn't others. Now, to be fair, I think he was top Honda in the race, so again, I think it does come to the fact that the KTM is clearly a better bike by quite a way. Now, I mean, on the Friday, it did look like the Hondas would be good, and you would think on paper that a bit more of a corner speedy track, the Honda would be good, but Foggia just in the end just didn't put it together in qualifying, and then none of the Hondas were anywhere in the race, but he's never going to win the championship. Well, he's lost the championship now, obviously that has been sewn up, but this just sums up Foggia's season, don't you think, this weekend? Starts off well, and then just completely drops off.
Yeah, really, I feel sorry for him because last year he was blown away by a rookie, and he came into this year with everyone going, it's his championship. We might as well just skip Moto3. Foggia has a sewn up. There's no one that can touch him, and I reckon the pressure's got to him in certain parts of the season. Put together with the kind of hitting miss form he's had throughout his Moto3 career, to the point where it's harsh to say he'll never be a world champion because riders change as they go older, they get more experience. If you look at Dovi, when he first came into MotoGP, you'd never think he'd push one of the greatest riders of all time, Marquez, that close to losing a couple of titles. So riders, as they mature, as they age, as they gain experience, can change characteristics and become a different rider to what they are in their early teens and the lower categories. But for now, Foggia has a lot of work to do, especially moving up to Moto2. He's not the biggest rider. He might struggle on a bigger bike. I always look at, he's quite stocky, wide but low, so I always wonder why he has such a speed advantage when I'd imagine he weighs quite a bit because he seems quite stocky, like a small boxer. But it'll be interesting to see him on a Moto2 bike. I think he's going to struggle early on like most do, but when he gets up to speed, he has to get some sort of consistency because there's no there's no championships won these days from riders that aren't consistent, really. Like, you know, we talk about Pecco crashing, but he's always quick. He makes these mistakes, whereas Foggia might go 3 weekends without showing any sort of actual pace, and that's really where the likes of Guevara and Garcia really have just blown him away this year, and that's why, unfortunately, 3 races ago, he's lost the title.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of it. I mean, to be fair, I would argue a little bit on the last point. I don't think Garcia's had very good consistency either. I think that's also ultimately what's cost him. Although he did seem a bit better this weekend, he was much quicker, but it wasn't enough to stop his teammate Guevara winning the World Championship with a win as well. He has had an excellent season. The guy that actually beat Pedro Acosta in the Junior World Championship, so he had a lot of hype on him. I think he probably struggled a little bit with the pressure last year because he had that kind of pressure on him. Whereas I think Acosta kind of came in like everyone knew he'd be good, but he really blew people away like immediately. And then of course he did choke a little towards the end, but managed to bring the championship. But those two must be a pretty strong class that season in the Junior Championship with two Moto3 World Champions in a row. But you've really got to take your hat off to Guevara, haven't you? Because he's been pretty much flawless this season. He's been fast at every single round. I can't think of a round where he struggled. I think was he a little bit out of sorts in the last round, but I mean, that was still like 5th place, something like that. So it wasn't anything too dreadful. He's been out there doing the laps on his own. He's not been having to get a tow. And even when he's been a little bit behind the championship, he didn't panic. He just kept it upright. And I'm just so impressed with him. And even today, I mean, what a race he had. He didn't need to win that. He could have easily finished behind Garcia, but he wanted to win. You could tell it was World Champions ride. He was riding around the outside of people. Just phenomenal season, phenomenal race. You know, you run out of words for Guevara, and I reckon it's going to be fantastic in Moto2 next year.
Yeah, he's a star of the future for sure, and he's just been brilliant throughout the season. And it's funny if you think back, there was a point in the season where you thought Garcia was the number one rider on that team. You thought he has the experience, he's been there. It's kind of his time to come to the fore and win a title maybe. After the start of the season, everyone was kind of going, Garcia is the man to challenge Foggia, and Guevara will have a good season, he'll win races and he'll be there. But I don't think anyone really thought that he'd have this good of a season. And again, to be the first champion of the year in all 3 classes, to win it this early shows great strength, great consistency. Again, the opposite to Foggia and somewhat to his teammate. And he's really just been thereabouts every race weekend. He's had a couple of bad weekends, but over a 22 race season, he's had maybe 3 where the others have had nearly 10, you could say. So he's just been really good. And again, last time out in Thailand, hadn't been there before, was battling in the top 5 against the best in the world. So really, he is a bright star for the future, and no doubt within the next 6-7 years, he'll probably be on a full factory GP bike. So his spiral will go straight to the top, and he looks to be a taller rider. So I'd imagine maybe could be all elbows, all action on a Moto2 bike. So I do look forward to seeing him in the lightweight class next year. So he will be pretty good, I reckon. I don't know if he'll be as good as Acosta in this year, winning races and being fast through pre-season, but I reckon he'll give it 2 or 3 years, he'll be fighting for the top positions of that class too. But again, have to give him, just tip your hat to him. What a season he's had, and he's definitely deserved that championship. He's just been best of everyone.
You make a good point about how early he's won it and being the first of the 3, obviously, to win the championship this year, first category to set up. Other riders that have won this early on the season do include Jean Mir, so you know he's up there with some good company. Whatever happened to that guy, I don't know. Whatever happened to him. But yeah, I think he's going to be pretty good in Moto2. Like you say, probably maybe not quite as good as Acosta's been this year, but that's probably for the best, because I think Acosta put a lot of pressure on himself by being so fast in pre-season. So perhaps it's a little bit better to sort of slowly build his way up. And he'll have a good teammate there as well that'll be at the front, and hopefully will help him out a little bit with Jake Dixon there. So yeah, hopefully he'll have a good season next year. But whilst we talk about Moto2, may as well move on to Moto2. I think there's only one person we could talk about this weekend, Alonso Lopez. What a ride that was! Obviously, a bit of a weird incident with Vietti. I'll talk about that first in free practice 1. He seems to think it was a bit of a misunderstanding, like he thought kind of Vietti was letting him through, but he wasn't. It was quite clumsy, really, just kind of hit into the side of Vietti, knocked him off. Fairly then got along that penalty, and he went like a scalded cat off the line, pulled away, came out. Still about second in the lead ahead of his teammate after the long lap penalty, and then did he win by about 4 seconds ahead of Acosta in the end then? What a race it was. He just disappeared, and that's the second win of the season. And I know, like, he came in like halfway through the season, well, not halfway through, about 6 rounds in. from the Junior Championship, obviously the Junior Moto2 Championship, where he'd been on a Bosco Sciorra, and he's been impressive since that first round. And I've got to say, honestly, he could fight for the championship next year with this kind of performance. Because I bet if you look at the points over the second half of the season, I bet he's top of most points picked up.
Yeah, well, we tend to always look at your teammates, and if you look at Lopez, at the start of the season, Aldeguer was pulling up trees. He came up from was he in the CV, the Motor2 CV, and he was quick
Yeah,
there.
they were both teammates there actually before.
Yeah, they were teammates, and he was the one that was tipped to be the quicker of the two. Then he came up, he showed great pace, had wildcards last year if I'm correct, and was just quick the whole time. And then Lopez comes in after being sacked off, getting a load of mistreatment, and he's been stupidly quick, really. I don't know where this sort of pace and this consistency, like you see riders come through a lot of time and they'll be quick and they'll crash. A bit like maybe you could say Pedro this year, he's been quick and crashed quite a bit. And he's just trying to find where the balance is, where Lopez just seems to be on the limit, but consistent. And maybe it's down to the Bosco Sciorra sashi, down to a lot of things really, but you have to say if he can keep this going. Now, Calix has dominated that championship for many a year, so would he be able to do it for a full season? I don't know, but for the last 5-6 races, he's been really good. So you must say that overall, he is a top-level rider, and going forward, could he actually challenge for the title next year? I'm not too sure yet. If you look at some riders, they have these kind of periods where they have a purple patch, they gain maybe 30-40 points more than they usually do. To do for a full season when the pressure's on, we talked about how Fodgy did it last year, where he wasn't expected to go on such a good run and put Costa under pressure, and he did it. Then this year he was the man, and he's lost the championship again. So it'll be interesting. Moto2 is stacked, and it will be for the next couple of years with the likes of Costa, Iagora, Sam Lowes, Dixon, Alonso Lopez, Aldeguer. Obviously, we still have Canet in there, so there's on most weekends, you could probably say 7-8 riders that will be able to win consistently. So it's not going to be easy, but if he can keep this pace up, there's no reason why at the end of next year we could be talking about how he's had a great season and he's world champion.
Yeah, I really do think that Bosco Sciorra, I think he can do it on that, because he seems to have been pretty competitive this entire every weekend, second half of the season. I'm pretty sure he's led the race at some point. Maybe there's been one or two where he didn't. Perhaps in the last race he didn't, but that was obviously weird conditions. But I can't really recall a race where maybe Aragon he did fall off on the opening lap, but again he was right at the front. So I don't know. I think that bike has taken a step. It definitely seems that way, especially with Aldeguer being a bit more competitive this weekend, which was nice to see, by the way, because you never like to see young kids struggling so much. Because he had a good start to the season, like you said, but I think his head has dropped a bit since Alonso came along. But it was nice to see him a little bit more competitive this weekend. But I really do think the Bosco Sciorra chassis has made some good progress, so I think it will be interesting to see how they progress into the next year. Calix might well respond, because they will notice this 100%, because that's 2 races they've lost now. I know it's not a lot, but considering they hadn't lost a race for about 3 years at least, that's, they'll take notice of that. I'm sure they will. But speaking of Calix riders, obviously move on to the former World Championship leader, Augusto Fernandez. Looked like it's going to be a fantastic weekend for him. Iagora's struggling. He's up there on the podium. He's got his teammate in front of him. Lopez is miles up the road. Jake Dixon's about 5 seconds behind. No pressure at all. And he just crashes at the southern loop. Such a mistake there for Fernandez. A bit of a rare one to some extent, because he's not really been the rider that's made the mistakes. But if you go back to the start of the season, he did kind of make this kind of mistake. I mean, if you think back to Mandalika, what was he doing at turn 1 there? He fell off there with a weird mistake, and he struggled at the start of the season, and obviously he wasn't struggling this weekend, but a bit of a weird mistake. Could this be the start of a downturn? Because he could have really put one hand on the championship with that result, because it was going to be a good few points in front of Iagora.
Yeah, again, these championships are all coming down to mistakes from people. It's rare at the moment we're having battles between championship contenders. You could say, all right, maybe the race in Phillip Island this weekend for the Moto3, we had the championship challengers fight each other for a bit, but for the last few rounds now we've had crashes from championship leaders that have changed the title. We'll get to GP in a minute, but that's another mistake. It's a weird corner to crash at, and didn't need to make that mistake. That was pretty much a done deal. He was going to gain 10, 12 points. The lead would have been up to nearly a race win, going 2 rounds to go. Now he's losing the championship by 4.5 points after half points were given last time out. You have to say now that's his first big mistake in this running. Iagora now was nowhere this weekend. We'll get to him in a minute, but Fernandez has shown some cracks now, and you wonder how he'll respond in Sepang, a track that is going to be hot, humid. We might have weather there. You don't know what's going to happen in Sepang. We usually do get some interesting and weird races there just because of how stressful it is for the riders and the bikes. It's an interesting track. The best riders in the world make mistakes there, so I wouldn't want to be going into that. I think at the moment now the ball is just swung slightly into Iagora's favour, so it'll be interesting. We'll see what will happen in Sepang. But that was a big mistake today when he didn't need it. He could have easily followed his team at home. I don't like Dixon was P4 at the time and he was down in P15 on the grid, I believe, way back on the 5th or 6th row after red flag went his qualifying session. So he had the pace, but he said himself that he burnt his tyre to get to the top 4. So Augusta really should just brought it home. That was really poor, and I guarantee he'll regret that at some point. Now, if he still wins it, he'll look back at it as a small mistake, but given the Leisure Championship rival going into the final 2 rounds, anything can happen now going forward. You just want to take it out of your own hands and put it safely going into the last 2 rounds, and he's not done that. And Igora has benefited from a really bad weekend, which is not something I thought I'd say before the race.
Yeah, it's not great. It has put him on the back foot, and to be honest, Sepang does seem to me like the Iagora kind of track. Hot, humidity, Asia. He's been in the Asia Talent Cup before, so he'll have plenty of experience at that track. I'm sure he'll probably race that track in other championships potentially. It is those kind of conditions that he'll know pretty well as well. Obviously, I know it's probably not quite so much in Japan. I know that's more of probably a Thai, Malaysian, Indonesian kind of thing, the greasy tracks, but I'm sure it does happen in Japan still sometimes as well. And like I said, of course, he was in the Asia Talent Cup, so he'll know these kind of tracks, Iagora. So I think Sepang could be a really good weekend for him, and you don't want to be on the back foot going into a weekend where you think your rival's going to go well. So this could be a big blow to Fernandez, but again, like you say, he might just see it as a little flaw if he does end up winning. And to be fair, better to crash on a weekend where your rival's 14th than when he's first. So he's not lost that many points to Agora. It's more the potential points he's lost because he could have had such a big lead. And I will give a quick shout out to Jake Dixon that you did mention there. He had a great race to come all the way from P15 on the grid to P3. Like that's a great race because that's his best finish of the season. Joint, I know he's had 3rd places quite a lot, so I just wanted to give a shout out to him because I think he did really well in that one. But we will come on to Iagora now. He was nowhere all weekend, and I don't really know why. I mean, this kind of does seem like a track I thought he would probably be pretty good at, to be honest. It's a bit of an old school kind of circuit. He's usually pretty, he was good at Jerez, a bit of a corner speed star circuit. He won the race there. He wasn't too bad at Silverstone either. So, I don't know. I was expecting a bit more from him. He clearly didn't get on with the bike. He has been here before, as far as I know. I think he was in Moto3 in 19, I think. Yeah, because he fought the championship in 20, which was his 2nd season. So, he's definitely been to this circuit before. But just a strange weekend for Agora, and quite fortunate, really. Again, I'll give him credit. He didn't fall off. So, that's, again, something that he's shown. He's been fantastic at just bringing, having the best bad weekends he can. But this has been the first weekend, really, where he's been really nowhere, and he's not been able to salvage much. But I suppose a few points is better than where Augusta ended up.
Overall, it's one, maybe half a step forward from. It was a weird weekend. You go back to Jerez, and we think of Jerez, you think of corners, but if you actually think of Jerez, a lot of them long corners, especially in the race, you have to kind of make a V out of them because you need to save your tyre. If you kind of try and ride that high corner speed, you will shred your tyre, and maybe you can take throttle control into it, and you can kind of think of it that way. Now, if you think of Phillip Island, colder track, so maybe it relies more on actual physical corner speed than Jerez, and so you made the connection there, and they're quite similar, but I reckon it's just a small difference in the type of race line, the race conditions, Jerez and Phillip Island, so maybe it's something to do with that. Again, it all comes down to the rider's feel. Maybe it's unlikely that the title battle is getting into him because it's been many races now, and it's not like he's on his last chance. He's still thereabouts. He was only 1.5 points down coming into this round, so it is quite a peculiar one. But then we go back to Japan where he won, and it was all heavy braking. He was backing it in. He looked so good. So maybe corner speed isn't him. Maybe he's good at saving the tires. Maybe he's a late breaker. So it's quite difficult to pinpoint exactly why he was just a bit off it this weekend. And again, like we always say, if you are 0.1% off it on a weekend, you will be 15th, and you have to be absolutely on every weekend in all three classes. And unfortunately, this weekend for Agora, didn't qualify well. Got fortunate from a lot of people crashing in Moto 2 that he gained more points. He could easily, even with Augusto's crash, he could easily finish outside the points. Joe Roberts retired on the last lap. That was another couple of points. A few rides in front crash. So he did pick up. Again, you have to stay on to win it. So he's doing the right thing. But I didn't think he'd have a weakness like this at a track that is a rider's track. So it's a surprising weekend from him. And I'd like to know really where and why his pace wasn't there as much. It's a bit of a weird one because he didn't show pace at all really all weekend. And overall, it's kind of only a half step forward from him because he could have really have benefited today from his title rival crashing. I don't know, but I reckon he'll suit the next two tracks more. I reckon if anyone's gonna, I actually don't know if I should say this. I'm gonna touch wood first, but if anyone's gonna crash in Valencia in a cold track, it won't be him. I reckon he's the better rider of the two, but I don't know. We'll see. But I reckon Sepang should be much more suited to him because the heavy braking, it really relies, again, if you go back to the Jerez kind of analogy of corner speed and wheel spin, that track gets so hot, you have to manage the tyres there. I expect Igor to be really, really strong there. I don't know about Fernandez now coming back after a crash, how that'll affect his mental state, but for me, like I already said, it's just slightly now in Igor's favour.
Actually, you do make a good point there with the sort of my Jerez comparison being a bit flawed because I suppose you do stop Jerez to some extent. I mean, Bagnaia won there in the MotoGP class, managed to hold off Quartararo, so the two opposite styles there. I know Bagnaia does carry his corner speed quite well, but, his strength really is the brakes, and the Ducati, obviously, compared to the Yamaha, it carries the corner speed. So, yeah, you make a good point. And also, Agora's other win, obviously, he won in Japan as well, but also in Austria, which, again, start-stop. So,
Exactly.
yeah, perhaps I was a little bit mistaken on that one. I just kind of thought Jerez,
Well, Jerez still is massively corner speed, and like if you look at Lorenzo, the Rossis of the world, they were good there, but it in recent time the track has got so slippery, it comes down to a lot to your right hand, and I think that's probably what won him that week. It was where he won it over the likes of corner speed of maybe an Aaron Canet or Fermin Alligator, someone who has massive corner speed. So maybe there was just a small little adjustment there. That's what won him. I do think that corner speed is still key at Jerez, but I just think the maybe a more traction based and a good right hand would win your race there.
Yeah, so that does line up pretty well with Sepang because, again, slippy track, but it does have some flowing sections which you can take a little bit V-like if you want. So we'll move on to the MotoGP category then, and probably the first thing, obviously, the Australian Grand Prix, we had an Australian rider on the form of his life, a win in a second place. Now, I know he's had back-to-back wins before, because I'd forgot that till I just said that, but he is still on some fantastic form anyway, and he actually got a corner named after him. The corner that most people probably know as the Honda hairpin is now the Miller hairpin, and unfortunately, as the curse tends to be, the corner then didn't go too well for him in the race. Got absolutely rammed by Alex Marquez. Looked like a proper painful crash, to be honest. I really did feel for Miller. He was on the floor for a little bit, but fortunately, it does seem like he's okay. I've not heard anything otherwise, and he did go back to the box. So usually when they go straight back to the box rather than the medical centre, they're usually probably A-okay. But yeah, that bit of a curse there always seems to be whenever you get a corner named after yourself while you're still riding it. Never goes too well. Jorge Lorenzo could tell you that with the famous Marc Marquez bashing him out of the way at the Jorge Lorenzo corner. But what do you think to the? Well, I suppose there's not much to think about with the Miller crash. But what were your sort of thoughts with that? With Alex Marquez just destroying Miller there.
I think Miller just got quite unlucky with that because when I watched it live, it just looks like Alex Marquez gets him way too hot and just kind of makes a V-line for Miller and just hits him. But if you actually watch it further back, he's going for the move on Luca Marini, has to make a small adjustment, a bit like Johnny Ray and Bautista in France, where just at the last second he has to make a move and
Oh,
has
so
to
you're
release the
saying Alex
brake.
Marquez did it on purpose then, is that?
Oh, whoa. Whoa, that's a conversation for a different
Oh yeah, let's
podcast.
not get absolutely hated. I am joking, by the way. Obviously, that's just what people were saying. But yeah,
Yeah,
carry on.
anyway, different podcast. So he just had to release the brake, make a small adjustment, and then he was going in hot. And unfortunately, the extra 2 miles an hour he carried in, whatever it would have been, he just absolutely clattered into Miller. And like you said, it was a rough crash. He did take a massive impact to the back, but thankfully he was okay. He did get up and walk away out of his newly named corner. Unfortunately, it is pretty bad to be taken out on your first go around your new corner. But I have to say he's been on great form since the Barcelona test. I was thinking about a lot of people wondering why he had the corner named after him. If you think of, you have the Gardner Straight, you have turn 1, which is Dunes, you have turn 3, which is Stoner. So you have 8 world champions there, 8 championships are named from the 3 of them, and then you have Jack Miller, who is a 5-time winner in GP. Now again, they don't hand wins out in this class, and he's been a competitive rider for the last 4 or 5 years. But then you also need to think, where's the next Australian coming from? Jack Miller is not getting any younger. He's moving to kind of his last big contract, in my opinion. He's moved for big money to KTM, to a team that have struggled of late. So this could be like, I could easily see Japan being his last ever win. And I hate to say that because I actually am quite a big fan of Miller. I like his style, I like his personality on and off the bike. So it could be his last win. I really was gutted for him today because it's his home race and he was on such good form. Just got married. Everything was going right from until Marquez decided to end it all for him. But you go to KTM, you have 2 tough years there. Do you take where do you go then? Do you go to Superbike? So you don't know really what the next couple of years holds for Miller. So this could be his high point of his career, is these couple of rounds this season, being kind of faster than his teammate in many races, being a title contender of sort. So it was a bit of an interesting, but I did see someone point out the fact that you have the Gardner Straight, which is a brilliant straight. You come over crest down into one of the fastest corners on the calendar, which is Dunes, which is all about bravery, just like the man himself. Then you come through turn 3 sideways, peak Casey Stoner style. Then you come into a niggly little first gear hairpin. They've named that Jack Miller corner. So maybe it's fitting of his kind of career statistics that he's got a hairpin compared to the Gardner Straight, the turn 1 of Dunes and turn 3 of Stoners. But nonetheless, he has been brilliant in the class over the last couple of years, and I think it's great for him to get a bit of recognition as home track. But going forward, after Miller retires, who do we have the next Australian? Where is he coming from? He's the Australians are kind of going a bit like the Americans, where after the likes of Ben Spies, Colin Edwards, we really haven't had one for a couple of years. Cambodia was the man, but he's going back to America now. So let's hope the Australians can produce one. With, I think, Joel Kelso is probably the next big one, but he's maybe a couple of seasons off yet, challenging in Moto 3. So we're maybe going to be without an Australian on the grid in a couple of years. So we'll see. We don't know. Gardner going to Superbikes, is he ever going to come back?
I doubt
he has the talent. I doubt it too, but he has the talent for GP. But it's kind of it's like I use it as a tissue. You get one use and then you're thrown out and you're never back again. Like, so it's a cutthroat sport at the moment. But finishing up on Miller, terrible crash, unfortunately. Thank God he's okay, because it would have been terrible to see him injured, and I actually was really gutted for his actual race, because I do reckon he had something for the end of the race. Great to see him getting a corner, getting a bit of recognition for what he's done for his sport, and yeah, roll on Sepang, like he said, and he does seem to be okay. I've seen a few posts on social media first thing this morning after I re-woken up at 12 o'clock, and he said gutted for the weekend and stuff, but he seems to be physically okay.
I think, to be fair, I think this is the first corner that doesn't have a name already. I think the one they gave him.
Maybe, yeah.
That might be why. Because it's not actually called the Honda hairpin. Everyone just kind of knows it's that, because they used to be like Honda advertising there, I believe. So I think that's what it is.
Same as the kind of Brno Honda Hill. That wasn't actually, that was just because of people of knowing it from Horsepower Hill, like Honda Hill. Kind of,
absolutely race past
everybody. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I think that may be why, because obviously you got, like you say, you got Duins turn 1, and obviously that turn 2 Southern Loop, then turn 3 Stoners. So I think that's probably why they they gave him that corner. But who knows? I suppose maybe it'll be a secret forever. So then, from one crash that was caused by a mistake, but not the rider himself, obviously not Miller's fault, was Marquez's, to another crash that was caused by a rider mistake. Fabio Quartararo, well, his season's absolutely dropped off a cliff, hasn't it? Because Thailand, as it turns out, was actually to do with tyre pressures. We didn't know that at the time, but it does seem to have been to do with a tyre pressure gamble that wasn't quite right. I think they gambled on it raining more, so upped the pressure because they'd be riding around slower. But obviously the temperature was pretty high because the track just dried up instead. So that went pretty bad for him. And then this week, again, I mean, you can see how much the guy's trying. I mean, the other Yamahas were just in a line at the back, weren't they, pretty much? I think they were in front of Oliveira. I don't know what happened to Oliveira, but he was at the back of the grid for some reason. Not exactly.
He got a penalty.
He got a penalty. Oh, of course he did, because he got in the way, yes. Yeah. But either way, he didn't really... He was at the back anyway, and I think Raul Fernandez was there. I think they were like the only two riders behind the line of Yamahas at one point. But yeah, you can see Fabio's way pushing over the limit. Fortunately, I'm not sure what lap it was, but it was only a few laps into the race. Made a big mistake down towards the Miller corner, ran into the grass. He had a big snap, and then I think he had to then just release the brake to not hit. I think it was Marini actually. He had to avoid, so he had to let back off the brake and then run wide because obviously he had the big snap. He didn't want to obviously cause a crash or anything. Ran in the grass, rejoined about 22nd. That was the race over at that point. He had just got back up to the points and then crashed at the Southern Loop, but yeah, it was not looking like a good race for him anyway. He actually had looked fairly solid over the weekend, qualified decently, but ever since the start of the race, he looked off to me. I thought he had a problem initially because of the way he was turning into the corners. Like every bike, even the Ducati was carrying more corner speed than him, and I think it was just because he had to save the tyre so much, so he couldn't really take the corner speed right. But terrible weekend for Fabio, and got to say, I think this is really looking bad for his championship now.
Yeah, it's each week we kind of defend him, and this week, now, the way I look at Fabio is you can pinpoint where his championship starts to go downhill. I look back at Assen, where he made a bit of a overzealous move on Aleix. Lost points there. Didn't really need to do it.
Yeah, if he had 20 more points now, he'd be looking not too bad. He probably wouldn't have made the mistake today.
Exactly. It starts there. He goes, well, it's one mistake. I still have a big lead. Then we go forward. He starts to underperform. Sachsenring on, he's just not been quick enough. And he's come out on Saturday afternoon, so after qualifying, saying there is no such thing anymore as a Yamaha track. After basically all weekend and all the press saying, oh, this is a great track for Yamaha, does high corner speed. Surely this weekend you'll have a chance to overtake and pass and reclaim some points and win. And all the journalists were banging on how Lorenzo was great here, Rossi was great here, Zarco on the Yamaha was fast, the Yamaha's always good here. And he kind of agreed with it and goes, yeah, it should be a good weekend, this, that, and the other. Comes out fighting Saturday after putting in what he said was an amazing lap on Saturday, was 5th on the grid, and said, I'm just losing everywhere. He says he does no such thing anymore as the Yamaha track. So the way I look at the development of the Yamaha, because for the last, we'll say 2019, 2020 and 21, the last couple of years of Rossi, Maverick and Fabio in the team, the development switched very quickly to Fabio when they realised he was kind of the future. Rossi said he couldn't ride the bike was going the direction the bike was going. He said it just wasn't for him, couldn't get his head around it. Maverick complained every single week that he didn't know what the bike was about, didn't know what direction was going in. He, other than that, could do the odd result, but it was more down to him than the bike at times. It was tracks where he was good at. But it was always Fabio seemed to be getting the preferential treatment. And I reckon they've actually come full circle, and they got lost a bit like 2017, 2018, where they kind of got lost with the bike, where it doesn't seem to be a high corner speed bike anymore. It doesn't seem to be a late breaker. It doesn't seem to go out of the corner. It doesn't seem to be brilliant on tyres. It's obviously not top speed. It doesn't seem to have a strong area anymore. It doesn't seem to have the Ducati has the stopping start. Honda always was great out of the V. The Yamaha was always great on the edge of tyre. So was the Suzuki. The Aprilia now seems to be kind of best of everywhere, but kind of jack of all trades, best of none kind of way. I know you look at the Yamaha and you go, well, it's kind of, it does that okay and it does that okay, but it's not a championship winning bike. And then we put probably one of the two best riders. I'll keep Mark is I rate Fabio a lot more than I rate Pecco, and that's nothing against Pecco. I believe Pecco's a fantastic rider. But what I've seen Fabio do on that Yamaha in the last 18 months has just been extraordinary. Shades of 2004 Rossi, where the bike isn't there. He's better than all the riders around him, but the bike is just less, and he's making the difference himself. And unfortunately, in 2004, if you were P5 in the race, you were probably 20 seconds off the win, whereas if you are P5 now, you're 0.2 off the leader. So it's just so tight that these small margins where he can't make up these small little differences and small gaps is where he gets caught. And unfortunately now he's in a kind of a hard rock and a kind of difficult spot really between overriding, making mistakes like he did today, and settling for P8 while Pecco can ride more consistently and get a P3 and follow home Bezzecchi, Martin Marquez, his teammate Miller, and he can just follow these riders home. It doesn't have to stress the bike. The Ducati's brilliant electronics wise. It doesn't seem to eat the tyre. It turns better than it ever has now, and it also has that unbelievable engine. And you kind of look at Fabio and go, well, how can he compete? And he's done it for so long. He won the title last year with pretty much the same conditions. He was dominating the championship on merit that also Pecco's crashing, but he was taking all the points where he got it until we came to Sachsenring, and then it's going downhill and to the point where the run of Ducati has just caught him and he can't do anything to stop the tide. Going to Sepang, I don't see any change really. There's two big straights, there's a couple of intermediates. It's a track that you need a lot of rear grip, something Yamaha does not have. Electronics need to be dialed, something that I still think Yamaha aren't the forefront of the sport on the Magneti Marelli ECUs anymore. So he's being positive. He's being Fabio. He's kind of taking it all in stride. He's been there before. He knows what he has to do. But today's mistake was solely down to the fact that to get to the position he was in, he was over the limit, making a bike that isn't good enough, dragging it forward, makes very, very small mistakes because of this, and then ends up further back. And unfortunately, he was, again, a bit of desperation creeps in. You can't really blame him. Mistakes like this happen, and now he's 10, 13 points back, 2 races to go. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Pecco wins it in the next round. I could see Fabio 8 and Pecco 2nd and clinches the title. But again, then we also look at Sepang. There could be some crazy typhoon, massive temperatures. There could be something crazy going on that weekend, so you really can't ride it. But like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if Pecco wins this title next time out because of how poor that Yamaha is at the moment.
Yeah, it's not looking good for Yamaha. I do slightly disagree. I think the Yamaha still is the corner speed bike, but it doesn't have so much of an advantage anymore compared to...
Yeah, that's kind of the point I make. Yeah, I'd still call it a corner speed bike, but it's not worth 3/10 a lap or 4/10 a lap anymore.
Yeah, you don't gain the straight time back.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you did before. And also, it wears its tyre out too much to do that. So the other bikes, yes, they don't carry the corner speed, but then they don't have to make the lap time, whereas the Yamaha does. I always think every time when it comes to this stuff,
syndrome.
Yeah, it's like the Yamaha, they have to take more risk every time to try and make that same lap time, whereas the Ducati, you don't have to take any risk to open the throttle on the straight. So, it's I always feel like that's why it's at such a disadvantage. But we'll talk about the race a little bit more, obviously, as a whole. It was a strange race. It started off with such a big pack, which I think is what made Quartararo's mistake so much worse. I think perhaps if they weren't in such a big pack, he wouldn't have been so bad. Again, that also doesn't help with carrying the corner speed when you've got a slow Ducati in front of you through the corners. And perhaps he would have been able to stay on the track if it wasn't such a big pack, because I think he had to release the brake more to not collect anybody in the pack, and he probably wouldn't have been maybe pushing so hard if he wasn't being overtaken all the time. But it reminded me very much of sort of a mid-2018 race where sort of Dovi would get to the front and back the whole field up to save the tyre. You'd have the likes of Rossi would lead for a few laps, and then as soon as they all started pushing, the Yamaha would just drop back. It's actually very similar because the Yamaha was nowhere in that period too. But it was a bit of a tyre conservation race. But then it did break up into a proper all-out scrap with about half the race to go, and then they really started going for it with about 5 to go. But strange race. We haven't seen like one like that for a while, but a good race, which again we've not seen for a while because it's been so difficult to pass. And today we were getting passes left, right, and centre. And you know what? Isn't it a coincidence that the one race where they don't really use the ride height device very much, and the temperature's cooler, so the front tyre doesn't go through the roof, they can actually pass each other again.
Yeah, that's a excellent point. And just to go back to your analogy of the 2018 mid-race, exactly like the 2018 Brno race, there was two Hondas, two Ducatis, Yamaha slightly further back. They were 3 to 4 seconds off qualifying, and with 4 laps to go, they all just went for it. And I think Davi won that one, if my memory serves me right.
I think so, yeah.
And I think Davi had Lorenzo and Marquez. Something they were on the podium. I don't know which order. I think Davi, Marquez, Lorenzo was the something like that. But anyway, very very similar. Where they knew they couldn't burn out the tire, they had to save the tire, and they were all actually going back to your point there about the ride height device. A lot of them were asked before start of the weekend. Obviously, the first time we've come to Phillip Island with the ride height devices and this extreme aero of the last 18 months to 2 years. Most riders said there probably isn't anywhere on the track. They probably won't use out the last corner because the run to turn 1 on a GP bike is so short. But most of them did actually start using it out of the final corner into turn 1. You could see them kind of using it. But you make a great point
place, wasn't it?
Exactly. For safety point, you can't use it. You're on the edge of the tyre, kind of between 20 and 40 degrees lean so much of this track that you can't lower the bike and do it. So it just shows that these unbelievable engineering feats are amazing and they should be applauded, and they're the greatest thing in the world for going around the track at high speed. But MotoGP is about the racing. It's about you look back at history, you don't really look back at how you remember 2004, 2005 Rossi making passes on Gibernau, 2003 the Hondas versus Honda. You don't remember what lap times they were doing. You remember the passes and the overtakes. So we're in a great time now where the numbers are never been better. We're going faster than we ever been. We're breaking top speed records everywhere we go. They're breaking later. Every lap record known to man is going because these bikes are just so quick. But we're kind of getting into the Formula 1 syndrome of if we make these cars so quick, they are too quick. They're braking so late. They're braking in the corner. You can't outbrake each other. But then you take away a bit of this tech, make it kind of unusable for a weekend, give a track that has natural good flow, and we have probably the best race of probably since 2018, 2019. It's been absolutely belter, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I actually stayed up and watched it, because I always tend to, when I watch back Recorder's race, I get to I watch the first 3 laps and then go, alright, I'll just put it on ×2 and I'll just watch it double speed just to make up time. So I was glad I watched it at full speed and watched it normal. So great race. Proves we don't need these ride height devices. They're better off without them. Again, now, fair play to Ducati for developing these things and Suzuki to come along and make theirs. We don't need them. They're not good for racing. Okay, they might have a slight safety benefit that it makes the bike more predictable on corner exit. But look at BSB. You've no traction. The racing's excellent there because it's all down to the rider. And I think GP is slightly getting to the point now where for a long time in F1 you needed a car to win. You couldn't win with a kind of second tier car. And maybe now you can overtake in GP because of that tech issue. So going forward, I'd like to see it move more. I don't think the wings make it as bad. I think the ride height device is more of an issue really because of how ridiculous the bike is out of the corner now because of that and how late they can break over it. So they'd be the first thing I'd like to see go. And they also, a massive issue for safety, they fail at all the times. How many times, even today, Pecco couldn't get his...
failed, didn't it?
Pecco's failed on the grid. He had a terrible start over it, but nearly every weekend we hear someone fail. Maverick failed in Sachsenring, Binder, Mandalika.
I feel like Alicia's failed in one race. Was that Austria has failed?
Aragon? Oh, Austria. No, you're bang on. Austria. Yeah, he couldn't. He got a bad start because he couldn't engage it and it wasn't working for him.
I think he failed twice that weekend.
He had issues well on Saturday with it. We've named 4 off the top of our head without putting any issue. If we look back through the weekends, we could probably find one a weekend.
Morbidelli had one once on the Petronas Yamaha, I remember.
Yeah, Rossi had it as well, I think. Binders had it more than once on the KTM. I can't remember exactly where, but there's been many instances where these devices have failed and then they become less safe. So I think they need to look into this going forward. But after going full circle, coming back around to whatever the point was, weird start, tire battle, and really like a mid 2018 race where the tires were just like chewing gum.
Yeah, let's not forget as well, they were still breaking the lap record even with only the device on the straight, so it's not like they're really slow without it, so they could get rid of it, and to be honest, I think you'd still be beating the records again within a couple of years, so just how it is. And they had the aero back in these 19 races and stuff, yeah, right, it wasn't quite as advanced, but if you look at the 2019 Ducati compared to the 2022 Ducati, it still looks fairly similar. I mean, if you look at the Yamaha, it's the same bike, but the Ducati, obviously, probably the most technologically advanced. It's still, you can tell, it's like an older sibling. So, yeah, I don't think the aero does make a bit of a difference, but it's not so bad. It is definitely the devices, and there you go. You take the devices out, and we have a great win, a great race.
Great win too, though.
Anyway, Pecco picking up some good points this weekend, obviously on Fabio. Looked like he was actually going to win the race for a lot of it because again, just did what he does best. He got to the front and just made no mistakes. It seems to be his preferred strategy, doesn't it? He doesn't like to scrap so much. He likes to lead at the front. He's certainly a bit more of a Lorenzo type where he likes to lead. I mean, Lorenzo probably did enjoy a good scrap, but not quite as much as Rossi Marquez does. He definitely likes to sort of knife through, but a smooth riding style, late on the brakes. Kind of a little bit like how Dovi used to kind of win these kind of races too, although Dovi does tend to do pretty well in the last lap scrap. But he did just lose out to Marquez and Rins at the end, but like he said in his post-race interview, he wasn't too bothered if they went past him because he knew Fabio was out, so he just needed to finish. And yeah, to be fair, I'm not going to lie, coming into the weekend, I thought if one of them was going to crash, it would have been Bagnaia. And he proved me wrong. So, well, I also thought Vinales was going to win, and he certainly proved me wrong. Did he even get the points in the end? What happened to Vinales?
17th. Honestly, I'm going to take a guess it was a right height device failure. It probably was.
Probably, yeah, but they don't use it really, do they? Oh yeah, but if it got stuck
Still
down,
failed.
yeah. If it failed off the start, then imagine Phillip Island with the device stuck down the whole time. But yeah,
anyway, he did finish P17 after being P7 at one point. So, in all seriousness, there was some sort of issue. Now we don't know at the time of recording because it hasn't been announced. But
yeah, surely he had an issue. He's pretty good at saving his tyre out of everybody. So
I reckon his weekend was sabotaged. Now I know you did tip him in last week's podcast, but he was quickest in FP4 and FP3. He was really quick.
Yeah, he towed a late in quali, didn't he?
And then he basically threw his own qualifying session for a late. So his race weekend kind of was over there because, like, you look at Miller making up so much time early on, using a lot of tyre. How would he have fared if he was in the race with 3-4 laps to go? You kind of look maybe Maverick, same thing. If he saved his tyre, stayed P10 for the whole race, he might have got a top 5 toward the end. But again, I don't know if he would be able to win it just because of how low down the grid he was.
But yeah, Pecco obviously did a great job managed to pick up some points against Fabio. But really, the two riders of the weekend are Marquez and Rins, because Marquez, I mean, let's start off with the save at MG in the, was that in qualifying he did that? And
yeah, Q2, his first. Second flying lap.
Yeah, the exact same save he did back in 2019 with the hand gesture at the end as well to match. Just, I think that really does prove that 2019 Mark is back, and you know what, he was looking good all weekend, and yeah, Paul Espargaro was pretty quick for most of the weekend, but in the end, where were the rest of the Hondas? Obviously, Alex Marquez was taking out Miller, but I suppose Nagashima's not expected to do so well. But even still, Mark was again a class of his own compared to his teammates.
Yeah, he was immense all weekend. Really, he was quick. He was consistent. There doesn't seem to be any more of him since his injury. He seems to be a lot of time where he had to kind of pace himself, whereas that seems to be gone now. So we're kind of getting to a point where I think we've mentioned it, both of us have mentioned over the last couple of podcasts, how much of his performance is bike related or is it him. We do believe that the Honda isn't a great bike at the moment, has been for years, but he was always making the difference. But him being on and off the bike, in and out of the hospital, in and out of the surgery, has the bike development gone so wrong that it's just completely anti-Marquez and almost trying to get it to his brothers liking Nakagami. Sparrow, you've also Stefan Bradley on it trying to give some sort of development. So you really wonder how good that bike is for him. Now, I still, like I mentioned when we were talking about Quattararo's mistake, that there's two riders in the championship that are above the rest. It's him and Quattararo. Give them both very good equipment, and they will be like Rossi and Lorenzo 08, 09, where they will gap the field and they'll be ahead and they'll battle to the last corner. They are just... Obviously, we know Marquez. He's 8-time world champion, 6th in GP. He's beat Rossi, Lorenzo. He's beaten Davi. He's beaten them all of his time. Kind of made them all look silly at some points in their career. Now he's coming back from an injury similar to Rossi 2010, but I reckon he still has more pace coming back. When Rossi came back in 2010, he had a really poor second half of the year. The bike development kind of went towards Lorenzo because Lorenzo was on equal fitting for that year. So where Marquez doesn't have that immediate threat in the team, Rossi did. Marquez still has kind of the whole team around him building towards him. So I reckon Marquez will come back stronger than Rossi did in 10-11. And I still think he's just better than most of them. And once Honda really pulls its finger out, we could really see 2018 Marquez again, 2019. Now, I don't know if we see 2019 Mark where first, second all year long, because of these current bikes where they have right height of failures. They have, a lot of times we talk about kind of dud tires. It's interesting to see what could happen. Like if we look back at Texas, he should have won there, but he had, I think it was an anti-stall kicked in or something, kicked in on the grid. He went backwards, fastest man through the whole race, finished kind of mid-points. So Honda needs to sort their stuff out. Marquez is not fit yet, which is scary. Come to Portimao next year, start of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if he wins it.
No, me neither. I think he's definitely got a good shot. I mean, he could even win one of the remaining races. I mean, he goes pretty well at he goes pretty well at every track. Let's be honest, because he's so good. So he could definitely throw up a surprise. Well, it wouldn't actually be a surprise, I suppose, would it? But he could definitely throw up some kind of
today's performance anyway.
Yeah. Before today, perhaps it would have been a surprise, but yeah. Fantastic performance. And speaking of fantastic performances, of course, on bikes that have struggled this year, Alex Rins. I mean, who had their money on Alex Rins starting the weekend? I mean, the Suzuki...
Not me, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish you'd put a bet on it. See how much you would have probably got pretty good odds after.
Oh, you would have got amazing odds on him.
But yeah, the Suzuki, not the favoured bike this season after they announced that they were obviously leaving the championship. But to be fair, Rins, it just looked amazing. I mean, especially out the Southern Loop, every lap is I mean, he was passing the Ducatis there. He was passing the Ducati every lap out of there, which is unreal. Because, I mean, yeah, I know it's a high-speed corner sort of coming on. Well, yeah, it is fairly high-speed corner. It's one of those corners that really, you get on the power and it as you come out of it, and you just slowly build up the speed, which I can see why the Ducati would struggle, but it then carries you so much speed onto the straight. He was like passing the Ducatis on the straight almost, which was quite interesting to see. And it really reminded me of sort of Silverstone 2019, where he kept kind of doing that to Marquez, how he had such a good run through turn 1 that he'd just pass him on the run to turn 2 every lap, even though his bike was slow on the straights. So, you got to say, can't fault Rins at all. And that last lap from him was fantastic. You know, he got it covered off. He knew where he could pass Bagnaia, and I'm sure he knew Marquez was going to probably follow him straight through. And he obviously been battling with Mark for most of the race, so those two knew where each other were pretty good. Defended great into the MG hairpin, and really, this is the kind of race that Fabio needed to carry all that corner speed through those corners and past the Ducatis, but it just looked like the Yamaha wasn't able to do that. Perhaps if he hadn't made the mistake and stayed in the group, perhaps he could have come through towards the end and done that, but yeah, for saying how poor the Suzuki's looked since they announced their withdrawing, Rins did an amazing job, and it clearly meant a lot to the team as well.
Yeah, probably their last ever win in the sport, which is quite sad, really, to say that. But the harsh reality is that they won't be back. Probably not going to win. They might, you never know. They probably weren't going to win today. They did, so I can't really say they're not going to win the next two. But where I going into a bit of a tech dive, the where I see his performance today was he seemed to have amazing edge grip. So coming out of turn 2, out of the fast, high speed corners, he seemed to get on the power a bit earlier and maybe catch the Ducatis and everyone else pretty much out of turn 2. He got great drive out of the final corner, so he just seemed that where you'd always say Yamaha, great edge grip, great outer corner because of that. Now it looks to be Suzuki's prime trait. And again, we go back to the lack of ride height device, where that squats the bike down, probably takes away some of the natural bike ability. So if everyone kind of gets a level playing field, you don't really see the bike strengths. Where today we saw some bike strengths, some bike weaknesses, and we got a different race. We got some good battling, and we got a great result for Rins. And like, I was watching him. I remember watching and thinking, he's doing great. He's getting up towards the front, expecting him to get to maybe 6 laps to go, and just his tire just absolutely delaminating him to go backwards again. But somehow he managed to save his tire. Again, maybe just kind of rolling the bike in a bit more corner speed, using the edge grip when he needed it. Whatever he did today, he did an amazing job, and brilliant to see, because it's been a poor season for Suzuki. I think they are going to be last in the constructors over this now, but they've had such a poor going out year. It's great to see him have one last big result, and it's such a kind of amazing track. It's great to see, so I'm really happy for not only Rins, who will be here next year on an LCR Honda, but for Suzuki as well. They deserve it. They've been brilliant over the last few years, and it's a crying shame really they're leaving, because they just kind of got to where they wanted to be, to battle the top teams, and now they're kind of pulling the plug on it. So very sad, but a nice day for Suzuki if it is their last one.
Yeah, you make a good point. Again, talk about the rider devices. Of course, we already spoke about that. But if you think back to 2020, which was kind of the last season, I know they had them, but they weren't really refined yet. It was kind of the last season before this style of ride height device, and the Suzuki won the championship. So it does, yeah, I think you're right, the edge grip, because if you actually remember back to 2020, it always was the tyres. The Suzuki looked after the tyres so much better than everybody else, and they had so much more grip at the end. And to be fair, it looked like that again today. So I think really, if you get rid of the ride height devices, it's shown you can have a good race and you can have other bikes win. It does get a bit like, the Ducati is going to be up there every race. It's going to be a Ducati on pole position every race, pretty much. You get the odd one, you get Marquez on pole or whatever, or you get a wet session, somebody else does it. But it's the Ducati show a lot of the time. So it is great to see all the manufacturers really performing. And like you say, Suzuki, they just got themselves to such a good point. And yeah, I don't really know why they announced they're leaving. Obviously, they're leaving all racing entirely, so it's a company decision, I guess, and that does kind of suck, because it's bad for the people in the team as well. I mean, I know a lot of them have got jobs now for next year, but I'm sure there's some that still haven't, and that's just never good. And you don't want to have people have this uncertainty. The riders, obviously, they don't really have to bother. Yes, I know, like, it is a little bit worrying for them, but they'll find another ride, or even if they don't, it's not like their family's going to go hungry. It's not like the mechanics where that's a possibility. So, it's great to see, and it's great for the team, and you could see how much it meant to them. So it was really nice to see just a different bike win as well, because I think that's every bike's won now this year, except the Honda. So, Marquez, you got to
pull the finger out.
Yeah, pull your finger out, get a win. But that rounds out the Australian Grand Prix. So next up, obviously, is the Malaysian Grand Prix, and I'm going to do what I did last time, and I'm going to put Dill on the spot and ask him what are his predictions for the Malaysian Grand Prix. Who do you think is going to be good? What bike's going to be fast?
Bike fast, Ducati, win Marquez.
Well, very quick, very quick. Can't say I
hope it doesn't come back and bite me like Vinales does for you.
Hey, Vinales will win the next race. I don't know. To be fair, he probably will win this one now. I've said he's not going to, but it's
also actually a shout out for both Aprilias now. Going back to pre-season testing at Sepang, they were immensely quick. They were the quickest out of everyone. Now the bike has developed over the year. Everyone else has developed around it. That 2022 Ducati has been refined and is a different machine than it was when they were there first. But you'd still imagine that bike to be really good there. So hopefully we'll see a Leish back there and maybe fighting for some podiums at least.
Yeah, because they did struggle a lot in this one. Obviously, we already touched on Vinales. I know half in jest, because obviously how adamant I was he was going to win the race last week. But also Leish dropped towards the end. And to be honest, the second half of the season, you could see that the Aprilia is not quite as strong compared to the Ducati. It doesn't seem anymore. But I think that pretty much brings this episode to a close. So hopefully you have enjoyed that one. I'm sure you've had enough of us taking up your time. But if you did enjoy it, if you are listening on Spotify, please do rate us 5 stars. It does help. Or if you're listening on YouTube, do give the video a like. Because again, it does help push it in the algorithm and helps more people find the podcast. But I've been Reese. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you next week or next time for the Malaysian Grand Prix.